Right, this is going to be an episode of Thorin's Big Brains. That's right, the show does still exist. Obviously, if people haven't seen, I was just setting up a whole company to revolutionise the entire esports industry / replace it. So, essentially the narcissism hasn't decreased, unfortunately. It's just found new ways to blossom. And the Messiah complex has also morphed into a different thing now, where I'm not trying to save people. Now I'm sort of like the guy where it's like, I'm almost like a cult leader, I guess, because now it's more like, it's like, if you come with me, only you will be saved. So it's like, if anything, it's getting worse in some ways. So I'm going to figure it all out. But basically, be doing a company, all that content. But I still want to do this show from time to time. So we're doing this one. My guests are going to be RichsWrath, which is, of course, Rich from Side Select now. There you go. And EuroLeague. Those are his two main shows he does. Joke being,
I would just say very
those
quickly,
shows did also source guests from this show, to be fair.
That is true. No, this is basic. You can look at it from my narcissistic perspective. It's Thorin's like the feeder league or the feeder team, and my shit's obviously the big boy shit. Okay. So thanks very much, Thorin, for your dedicated.
So this show's Southampton, and then you just saw that Van Dijk played on my show, and you were like, I'm a genius. I'm going to get that Van Dijk guy in Liverpool. Bloody hell, I don't think it's too about league. Don't I? Yeah, exactly. No, don't worry. Listen, better people than you have done it, Rich. The real joke, one of the reasons actually, unironically, I did start this company is I got sick and tired of doing that with tiny creators and then having to just go, oh, well, there you go, Riot. You just take them and don't crush them immediately, please. And they were like, I think we'll just crush them in the first year. Oh, well, brilliant. I'll just pick up the pieces again. Come on, nurse it back to health. Come on, drink some milk. Oh, there you go there, Blizzard. You have it. I'm finished with that. Bloody, they've cracked another one. So, obviously, our other guest on this one is going to, by the way, Rich obviously used to run H2K and now is an agent for, well, unironically, League of Legends players. And then also, this is not a joke, does actually coach Call of Duty people. We've been into it in the past. We're not going into it again. Look, it's just real. Understand it's real. He does coach people in Call of Duty. I know that sounds like the meme, but that's actually just the absolute God's honest truth. And then our guest is Jensen Goh, who I've already told the joke on some insight that I did unironically once when I was really high, get mistaken on Discord for Jensen, the mid laner off Cloud9, and offered to do a reflections with him in the off season. And obviously, he was like, yeah, sounds brilliant. It was just embarrassing for everyone, basically. So, not that I'll never do a reflections. We could obviously do one in a totally different context, because actually, if people will notice, the interesting context that I brought Jensen on in my last few shows is, he's been trying, like a lot of people have over the years, like the Kelseys of the world and Emily's did, where they do their own YouTube content. And you try and do a mixture of scouting report of teams at tournaments. Because by the way, that's content that some people are going to want to watch and figure out what lanes will they play through, lane assignments, wave manipulation, all that jazz. I will say, it's never quite as big an audience as you'd think when you read Reddit, because everyone's pretending to be 200 IQ coaches. The joke is they'll never bloody watch half these videos. But if you do watch, there's usually an interesting angle. But here's the thing, Jess, I'm going to start straight with you, and you might know where I'm going on this one. So I will say, last Worlds, you nailed it on some of the EDG picks. That was the team that, I don't care that, even though they were the LPL champions, everyone was underrating this team. The joke is, it wasn't until they'd won Worlds that people gave them a chance to win Worlds. But you had some interesting content of that. So I did build you up, brought you on the shows this year. The one little snag is this, and we're just going to start here, right, Jensen? EDG at the moment is 5-1, and everyone's saying they're the best team in the tournament. And that was your edgy take coming into Worlds. Your edgy take was that maybe JDG or GDG, rather, JDG would be the team that might fail, right? So can you give us an update on that? What was the premise going in, and has it not worked? Did the other teams not play well? Why has it not gone as expected so far?
So I think that my take with regards to JDG was that I felt that this was a team that relied too much on winning fights from positions that they shouldn't be winning in, right? So the way that I model the game is about bring more numbers to the fight. Yeah, I'm still kind of doing that, right? It's about how do you move the numbers around the map to create numbers advantages, to get the proper setups, and then the setups will then inform the team fight, right? And JDG, they won by playing champions like Azir, like Zeri, that are able to kind of ignore these axioms of the game in which that I model my system around. So when I looked at that and I knew that the patch should be changing, Zeri wouldn't be a factor anymore, I had this feeling that, okay, JDG would not succeed, like the same way that Cloud9 struggled when they changed patches, right?
Oh, sure.
But
yeah.
But it turns out that the meta still allows them to do that due to the presence of champions like Aatrox. Azir still in the meta. Sylas was still a very prominent pick for them, and it still turns out that the meta rewards teams like JDG, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Korean teams and Rogue as well, where it rewards this style of play where if you lane well and you team fight well, this meta is very good for you, as compared to the other LPL teams, which are very good at making intelligent map movements and creating positional advantages.
Okay. What have your thoughts been on JDG, Rich?
On JDG or EDG?
JDG.
Oh, sorry, on JDG. Yeah, I think that the thing is, when you come in as LPL champions, obviously there's like a certain expectation if you're just a random casual league enjoyer who maybe hasn't focused too much on watching the LPL. But for anyone, especially who watched the playoffs, right? And by the way, for full disclosure, I don't watch any of LPL regular season, like generally speaking. If there's like a game on and I happen to have woken up at a time, whatever, but I always watch the playoffs. And for those who didn't watch it, should know that even though when we were sort of semi-lazily putting together our list of who will the favorite teams be, it was basically like Gen.G and JDG were like the two most common ones, right? And then people would throw in Tez or whatever. I think the thing about JDG, again, if you actually watch the playoffs, they won a couple of those series by absolute threads, right? Like, I mean, Jackie Love difference was one of the reasons why they won. Arguably, two of the reasons why they won both those series, right? So coming in, to me, I wasn't like as high on JDG as some other people were, maybe. Like, I did actually feel that they had mistakes in them in that sense. But I just feel like in the second week especially, a lot of the Asian teams figured it out, or figured out the Western teams, to be more specific. And to sort of quote what Kira said, which I actually think turned out to be absolutely true, I think one of the biggest baits in week one, and this is something that JDG were arguably the best team at adapting to, was that there was no respect in week one for niche picks. Like Seraphine Senna, for example, G2, it was open for G2 in multiple games if they were allowed, if they wanted to play it. And then, like, going into week two, the Asian teams just started banning this shit out, right? And I think that basically it's like in a boxing match when you allow, like, the first round, like Mayweather, he may just not throw a single fucking punch, right? And then once he's got you figured out, he's not scared of you. Their record's always going to be, like, good enough to sort of make sure they're in a position to qualify going in. And then, yeah, I mean, they look strong going away at the end, right? Other than, obviously, they lost the tiebreaker to T1. Was that them? Or sorry, was that EDG?
No, right, yeah, anyway, that's EDG.
Yeah, that's EDG. Sorry, I was getting confused. But no, I think, yeah, you can obviously make one thing that I think is really interesting, and this is worth saying, although I'll do a mini shout out to Flandre at the same time, because I actually think he's been a lot better than people have maybe gave him credit for coming in, because he didn't have such a good split. I do think that people were really overrating the LPL top laners in general coming in. Not that they weren't good or not that they weren't the best, but I think they were building this artificially large gap between them and everyone else. And I think the only player, as I said, other than arguably maybe Flandre, who's kind of sort of doing the whole meme Chinese Fiora thing in a pretty beautiful impression, particularly in that sort of fudge matchup, 30 CS after 8 minutes, I think it was, like getting ludicrous leads. But 369 is like the guy on JDG for me, and especially going forward when you're going to see these Asian team versus Asian team matchups. Because that guy is legitimately tiers above everyone else, in my opinion. I just think this guy's fucking insane at the game. I think he's showing the exact same level, if not a bit better, at Worlds. And when you've got, your Gao's not like the most lane oppressive mid laner, perhaps, and bot lane is like good, but obviously there are difficult matchups for that bot lane going into the last stage of this tournament. For me, it's all about 369. So if JDG are going to make a final and or win or look like the most elite team at the tournament, it has to be somewhat Kanavi playing through topside, because I don't think they can win the tournament, even though, as I said at the start, for people who are maybe more casual viewers and think, oh, but they're the LPL champions, I do not think they are the best LPL team unless they play through topside. And I don't think groups gave us like a particularly big insight necessarily into how they're going to do in the best of fives because of the points I already made. But I mean, yeah, it's very difficult for me to like discern massive differences in like overall level because they've been spread out over the groups, right, with seedings. So yeah, I don't know. To me, there's no like dominant favorite for the tournament at this point. Like usually when you're coming into a tournament, everyone has their favorites beforehand, and then maybe those expectations get adjusted. I think this is a really weird world where me personally, I didn't have I found it very difficult to pick favorites because of how much sort of spread around talent there was in the Asian regions going into the tournament. And after I've seen groups, I don't feel like I'm any the wiser, to be honest. I can see the win conditions for teams. And as I said, for JDG, for me, it's 369. But I can't, yeah, it's difficult to be like, yeah, they look like the best team. So I think they're good. But as I said, if they're going to progress, and my guess, by the way, is that they will not make a final. I don't have JDG making the final based on what I've seen so far. But if they do, it'll be through topside.
Okay. Do you want to jump in on that, Jensen?
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit more about 369, right? Because there's the whole meme about him being you can roll the dice and you can be a 3, a 6, or a 9. And I think that JDG, and if you look at the champions that he plays, I think JDG is covered very well for him in draft. When he gets champions where, just to take one step back before that, if I were to kind of profile him, right, where you have like the hexagon chart and then you have like, certain attributes and stuff like that, this guy, he's gonna have a 10 out of 10 on the laning, right? It's gonna be all the way to the very edge of the hexagon on one side of it. But I think that there's gonna be like this stat, which I'm gonna call presence of mind, where this guy is almost gonna be close to 0. It's gonna be a Jackie Love tier with regards to that, right? Where whenever I watch him play, it feels like I think that this guy is just doing the most illegal things in the world, and he just gets away with that. And when we watch him play champions like Aatrox, we watch him play champions like Sion, champions that can find yourself in a 1v2 and then buy your team enough time to then back you up, even though you put yourself in a bad position, it actually compensates a lot for that. But whereas when we saw him play the cannon against the likes of Damwon, then that's where you would see the trees happening a lot more, right? Where this is a champion where if you are in the wrong position, you use the ultimate at the wrong timing, you don't have the right presence of mind to understand that this is your job at this point of time, you're going to get punished very heavily. And we saw that in the one game that they dropped against Damwon. And I think that in general, Fiora is actually a champion I would think that if they do draft for him, he's going to put on a very strong he's going to put on a instinct performance. You're going to see a bunch of trees over there. And I think one of the more famous ones was when he used to play Jace quite a fair bit as well, where that's a champion where if you need to know very clearly what you're doing at any point of time, right? And whenever he played Jace, he would just play it, randomly get caught up by the jungler, or just completely throw a game and then bottom team fight and stuff like that. And that's always been my problem with 369. But so far, with the way the meta is panning out, they can put him on the tanks, they can put him on the Aatrox, these bruises in general. Renekton's a little bit, I say, just kind of crosses the bar for him. And Jax as well is slightly more on the tankier side. So I'm not sure if it's played Jax this tournament yet, but I think in general, this meta definitely covers for 369's weaknesses. And as long as the coaching staff on their team, and it seems that they kind of understand that he's not playing any games of Camille at all, they keep him on this class of champions, then you might see that enable to top side, utilize the strong laning, utilize the strong team fighting to kind of come out ahead. And maybe that's just the correct way to win Worlds, but I think every time we have been at Worlds, we have seen the evolution of the meta, right? There's week 1 group stage, week 2 group stage, and then when you hit the knockout stages, then there's an evolution once again where people start to ban specific to the teams that they're playing against. People start to bring in team-specific prep, and I think I've said on other shows before where teams actually start to show a little bit more of their hand, and this is what they actually have prepared for Worlds itself.
Yeah, because if people
ask quickly, oh, sorry. I was just going to ask, based on what you said about 369, I was just going to ask, how do you legislate for JDG winning LPL? Like, how do you feel they covered for these weaknesses? Because again, holistically, I think most people who don't know that much about the LPL would say there are a lot of good LPL top laners, but 369 is probably the best, or at least the most talented. And obviously, whatever their compositions were was enough to win LPL. So yeah, how do you legislate for the fact that they won LPL if you think this guy has so many threes in this game?
Oh, like I said, they covered well for draft, and then I think, which is why I said the JDG were frauds, because I thought that the meta at a point of time in the LPL playoffs was a very specific meta that allowed them to cover for a lot of these things. Because the way that the meta was set up, the way that dragons became harder to kill, the way that playing on 2 lanes was kind of negated by the fact that champions like Zeri and Azir could win fights where you're down in numbers, and he could play the Aatrox and he could play Sion and stuff like that. It made it a lot easier for them to win with. But if the meta becomes something like a Camille meta, a Cannon meta, or a Jace meta, I would even say maybe Gangplank to a certain extent, then this is where I think he would struggle a lot more.
Yeah, the thing is, if people don't know, because they might think if they saw someone in Insight, like, why am I bringing up that the 369 guy like meme? Isn't that a meme from last year or like 2 years ago? It's like, that's how you know the people who are heavily watching the LPL and the ones who aren't. Because if you watch all the games JDG won, yeah, 369 looks like the best top player in the world. He's unbeatable. Motherfucker, this is one of those guys where when I made that joke about Rookie and Knight being surrounded by serial inters in the other lanes, it's like, that's why Jensen here compared him to Jackie Love. This guy used to just int for fun in fucking playoffs and regional qualifiers on top esports. Like, he is the reason why Knight only went to 1 Worlds before this. Like, this guy, like, the team would always look awesome in the regular season. Like, man, they could beat anyone. And then in the playoffs, it's almost like they took turns. Jackie Love would just have a game where he just int in the middle of a fight. The 369 guy would just abusively int the fucking lane away, just wreck a champion that otherwise he was carrying on. And then at the end of it all, everyone would just do like a worse version of that, Rich. They'd just go like, if this Knight guy's so good, then why didn't he win the LPL? And it's like, oh, what's he supposed to do? The joke is he's against 2 teammates at this point in time, and that's without even talking about in the old days when they just didn't even have a support player. Like, holy moly, like, what is he supposed to do? So the reason why I bring that up, and I brought it up on Summon Insight, is everyone's going to, again, this is going to be the guy's whole career. It's only going to be when Odoamne retires, people are actually going to go, fuck, he was really good, actually. Like, it's only going to be then, because everyone already's counting him out because he's against the best top laner, right? First of all, he already showed you he could do fine against the other top Asian top laners when he's, I know the one from DRX isn't that good, but fucking obviously top themselves. Wayward was like one of the best top laners in the regular split. He was looking really good this year. So he's already showed he can do fine. And then in this particular scenario, like, I absolutely think there's a world where there's a bit of it in the top lane. I certainly want to see what Kanavi's going to play around, because Malrang fucking go top all day long, mate. He's going to gank all day long. And then the key thing is, I agree with Jensen and both of you, actually. In theory, you should probably try and play through top lane if you can in this matchup, because there's the part that everyone's forgetting. Like, I know Asians are amazing when they're the peak level players at League, because in 1 year, in your rookie year, sometimes you can look like the absolute best player. You can look like an absolute sensation, but it doesn't mean you're not a rookie. Like, their bot lane could easily just fucking fold in some of these games, or have a match where they just can't live up to the pressure. I always point that out. I was pointing out on some of the Insight. The pressure is greater if you're from Korea than China than if you're from the West. You know, when people spin it like, oh, boo-hoo, but then the EU fans will all flame us, and then in NA, oh, well, our feelings will get... Like, imagine someone saying you are a traitor who has betrayed our country and made us... You don't even represent us. Fuck off. Leave the country. Like, no one would ever do that. No one does that in LCS. They just go, you know, play better next time, you idiot. So I actually think that this is an example of a team where, look, understandably, they are supposed to be the favourite against Rogue on paper. I'm just sort of memeing when I say Rogue's going to win and just setting it up for like the fucking lols or whatever. They should win, but I don't think it's this foregone conclusion. I've already seen on the betting sites, the odds are ridiculous for Rogue. Like, people are essentially acting like it's impossible for them to win this series. So let's just do it as the contrast now. We'll talk a little bit about Rogue and then contrast the two teams for me. So Jensen, give me your thoughts first. How should Rogue match up into them, and what are their chances? Do you see them having a chance?
I actually think that they're a very similar team, right? They're very similar in identity. They value the same things. They value solid laning, and which is why Malrang is such effective jungler for the way that Rogue plays. And I think that this is a team that relies very heavily on winning those later game team fights, right? When I was watching Rogue, when I was watching JDG, and both of these teams were 3-0 after the first week, I felt that so many of these games were actually stolen from opponents. Like, once again, going back to my model of the game, right, where I don't think they were doing the correct things. It's just that they end up in positions where they outplayed the team fight and was able to win from there. And of course, if that is what the meta rewards, then that is how you play the game, and that's how you win games, right? But I think that because of how stylistically similar both of these two teams are, it will come down to player quality. The hope for Rogue, I would say, is possibly around mid-jungle if they can try to attack Yakal's champion pool in any way. But I was taking a look at it earlier today. He's no longer the LeBlanc Zoe 2 trick. He's got the Azir, he's got the Sylas. Although I would say Sylas is probably on the weaker side of his pool, and if he needs to, he can probably put a Lucian or something as well. And I don't really see that happening. And the way I looked at it, if I'm Rogue, I'll be trying to think about how do I use Trimby's champion pool, or try to cheese draft 3 times within the best of 5, right? They need to have very innovative drafts to really get the edge against JDG. Because if
by the way,
game just
on that
comes down to
line,
things,
do you see why I took that as the angle as well? That was my angle on Summon Insight. That it's the all I said about Trimby was the champion Ocean, because what people are missing is they're all going to flame him for that Nasus pick. Dude, that is exactly what could allow them to win against Asian teams. Like, he has like a mad amount of people don't even know. He even has champions when the enchanters are strong. Supposedly he plays like a banging thresh and stuff, like, and could play a pike as he just never did in the rogue, basically. So like, I actually think you should go lean into that. It's like one of the rare times. When are you ever going to get a Western player that just has a way bigger champion pool than the people he's playing against? He's playing against a rookie.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I mean, Comp and Trimby, they definitely have been performing throughout Worlds, with the exception being the game that they had against TES, where they kind of got banged around by Jackie and Mark, right, on the Blitzcrank-driven matchup. But the reason why I still have JDG being the overwhelming favorites is that there's a worrying trend. I mean, the memes aside, is that that Rogue, they have been banning Aatrox on blue side themselves. So one of these things, I think that on red side. Let's talk a little bit about red versus blue, right? Because the last time we had a similar meta with once again TS and JDG being at Worlds, it was and I think the whole thing. I mean, we talk about T1 RNG as well, right? Because the last time they played, it was the whole blue side gap that T1 came up with. The interesting thing is that blue side has won a majority of the games, but if you look at first trick statistics, red side has 70%, right? And I think that the way that this trend goes is that red side teams, you're kind of locked into 2 bans at the moment. You are locked into an Aatrox ban, you're locked into a Yuumi ban, and on top of that, Silas as well as the Lucian Nami pairing are the other big things that I think teams want to kind of control and draft at this point of time. But if Rogue have to ban Aatrox themselves on blue side, I think that this will greatly hinder their chances of trying to find a very strong angle where they could end up playing against a Fiddle's lane. Then that can let Trimby pull out the Soraka, play a Nasus, or something a little bit more creative. You know, pull off a Vel'Koz, a Zyra, or something, surprise us, right? But if you're up against the raw power of a Lucian Nami, a Silver Yuumi, I think that will be a lot harder to do. And if you have to ban Aatrox yourself on blue side, that it makes me worried, right? If they have the ability to create the draft gap, to really find any angles against JDG in the first place.
Fair enough. How do you have a matching up, Rich?
Like, to me, it's like a heavyweight fight. Like, sometimes you see a heavyweight boxing match when there are 2 guys and like, yeah, this guy in theory shouldn't have a chance, but he's fucking huge. And it's like, even if it's puncher's chance, the odds should be better than like 10-1, right? Like, surely. So I think the odds are absurd. I think Rogue has a legitimate shot of winning. I do obviously have JDG winning, but I actually think it will be relatively close. To Jensen's point, I don't think that come match time, that Rogue will be in a position where they have to feel they need to ban Aatrox on blue. Like, ultimately, I think it's more to do with how they want to build their comps rather than Otto can't play Aatrox or something. Like, I'm sure he can, or if he couldn't, then in this week, I'm sure by the end of this week, he will be able to be comfortable enough on that champion. Because I agree, if they go into that series knowing that every time they play blue, and if the other team knows every time they play blue, an Aatrox ban is coming out on that side, that does actually mess things up quite heavily, I think, in terms of how the dominoes fall there. In terms of matchup, I'm going to go back on what I said initially, actually, because I think, as I was saying there, like the idea of playing through top side, I think that's like a win condition projecting forward. Ultimately, like if they're going to win the tournament, I think playing through top against Rogue is actually kind of dumb, because one of 2 things will happen. Either it's not like the god tier top diff that you're hoping it is, and Otto just does what he usually does, and at worst goes kind of even or like loses gracefully, which means that the fucker's still going to be relevant in the latter periods of the game anyway. So it's not like a great way to go, generally speaking. I think in this specific matchup, like trying to win through like diffing Otto is probably not a great idea. But also to your point, Thorin, I think, yeah, the hope missing lane, like people don't even really think about it. Like, Westerners don't even think about the concept of rookies when they're talking about the East. It's just like the East always has the psychological edge, and it's always David versus Goliath. So the pressure's always on our rookies and not theirs. I think you play heavy as fuck towards bot lane. I think that comp Trimby, because of the draft advantages that theoretically they have, and you can rarely say that of a Western team, right? Other than like 2019 G2, that they do have specifically in the bot lane. I think playing through bot lane and how well they've been performing, and specifically how well Trimby's been performing, because comp's always been fire pretty much. I think that is actually a legitimate win condition for Rogue. And I don't, by the way, think Hope missing is necessarily a better bot lane than Trimby comp. I think it's sufficiently close, at least, that if your jungler is heavily prioritizing bot, and if Otto's like, even if he's under tower, if he's still getting CS, if he's still staying somewhat relevant, you can allow that to happen if Malrang's getting comp and Trimby ahead, because comp is the only AD carry I've seen, and this is one of the reasons why, by the way, why Rogue still prioritize or somewhat prioritize the Lucian Nami, and why they're so good at Lucian Nami is comp is one of the best, probably the best limit testing EU AD carries in terms of playing on the edge and getting damage output. Those two are so fucking good at Lucian Nami, it's insane. And I think that is actually a massive boon potentially in this matchup. And comp is an AD carry that if you get him even slightly ahead, he knows what being slightly ahead means, versus, you know, other AD carries who might not feel comfortable pushing the limits unless they're comfortably ahead, right? Like, oh great, we got a fucking level 1 and 2 kills and now I'm an item up at 10 minutes, right? Like comp, if he has an edge, he will play to that edge. And I think that's actually Rogue's win condition. I think Larssen just needs to be himself, more or less. I know it's kind of like a lazy take, if you like, but I don't think the game's going to be won and lost based on Larssen, other than in draft. I think it's important that Larssen gets champions that he is very comfortable on. I think it is important that he gets the Azir. I think there are a couple of games in this past week where you're basically thinking this would be a different game if Larssen did have his Azir. Whether or not the the Asian teams or JDG specifically will start like pinching his pool, which is a tactic I would do, by the way. I would probably pinch Larssen's pool. I think that's the best pool to pinch from opposition's perspective. Then that could actually potentially be a problem. That's not to say I don't have faith in Larssen to put in a good performance, but I do think he has the most exploitable pool of Rogue. I guess arguably Malrang as well. But yeah, I would play to bot side. I would have Malrang. You know, but I wouldn't try and play like too restrictive or be like too specific in how I want Malrang to path or necessarily even like how I want Rogue to play out the game, other than the sort of umbrella directions of we are playing to bots and we're going to play aggressive or whatever, which again sounds shallow, but I don't think players like Malrang, I don't think you should tie them down so heavily to like a really specific, this is how the first 7 minutes of the game looks game plan. I think they need to feel that they can win playing somewhat on what got them to the dance, right? Which is a lot of just well-measured, instinctive play, while they're full of confidence. I think if the series starts badly, then it can get away from them. But no, I think this is going 5 games, honestly. I have JDG winning, but I think that Rogue is good enough that, yeah, it could easily go 5 games. And as I said, I didn't have JDG as like one of the best LPL teams, to be honest. I do think obviously they're very good, but no, I think Rogue is good enough to do something in this series.
I could see it going 5 games as well, actually, right? Because the way that these teams match up is that you end up taking a team fight around 30 or 35 minutes with the way that both of these teams play. I don't really think JDG, unlike the other LPL teams, which is why I didn't really like them, is that they're not particularly good at really pushing an agenda, but they'll just like grind you out, they'll stack the Drakes, and they'll take the big team fight against you. It's just that they're really good at taking those team fights, right? And that also kind of plays into Rogue's wheelhouse. It is possible in those games where you see a mistake from Hope, or you see a mistake from, I wouldn't really say, maybe 369 or Yagao or something, and then based off that, Rogue's able to snowball a team fight, like the same way that they won against TES in the group stage, right? Where there was the fight on the top side of the map where they found Trimby and all of a sudden they lost the fight and Rogue all of a sudden has the Baron in what was otherwise up to the point a very TES controlled game. So things like that might happen as well in the set. They can win one game like that. They can win another game, maybe through a draft gap, maybe through bot lane, and then that's how the series goes to 5 games. But I think that overall, I think there's something that Monty said on Summoning Insight as well, where until it isn't, the games will look close simply because of how both teams approach the game.
Just go in order. Obviously, on the same side of the bracket, you have the T1 RNG rematch of the MSI, except there's 2 caveats. One, they do have a different top lane. If people don't know, they had Bin at the time, who, by the way, actually did quite well in the final. Actually, sort of like, it was one of the moments he smurfed before he got kicked to the curb. And if people don't know how weird the LPL is, when he actually went to his next team, he was pretty good. But then they brought in this guy, obviously, who turn out to be one of the people that everyone was loving this last season. Everyone was thinking Breathe's really good. So we're coming into a scenario now where the other factor to mention is, even though RNG won, which makes this weird, they were the ones, if you remember, that had to be at home playing over the internet, and then everyone had like artificial ping. So I have to say, like, stylistically, there's reasons, like, I'm interested. Like, I think RNG has a chance. I notice T1's the heavy favourite at the moment, but I do think it is a very different series. So Jensen, do you want to start me off on this one? Like, how do you see this one going? Because it feels like, to me, because like most people do just go with recency bias in League. So because of how T1 did in the second week, they're hailed as like, maybe they are going to win Worlds or be in the finals. And RNG is almost like, whatever, you know, they got found out by Gen.G and now they're just all right again. And I notice everyone's just down on that. RNG and EDG just getting all of this Worlds, it feels like. So how do you see this one matching up?
For this one, I actually feel a little bit more down on RNG, but it's really hard to tell because there's just so many asterisks and caveats with players being sick and having to play on stage and stuff like that. Wei was a very big factor in the way that RNG beat T1, right? If we were to recall to that creative potting, the creative potting that Wei had in game 1, when he found that lane gank on the Caitlyn Morgana was a very big part of why they were able to really break the stranglehold that T1 had, right? So T1 had a very different style in Spring as compared to what they had now. In T1 in Spring, they had this very full court press style. They were playing range top laner, double range bot lanes, and then they would have the jungler just be there to match you on all of your timings so that you couldn't really find a way to break out any of your laners, and it would just feel that you're suffocating under the pressure that T1 was putting you under. And of course, people will remember the series for the Ari versus Lissandra setups, and people will remember that for the infamous blue side gap, right? Where T1 blamed blue side for being a big factor, where it was true to a certain extent, because if we were to go back and look at the drafts, is what enabled top lane to be a determining factor in those games, right? As much as Bin was carrying when he got the Gwen, when he got the strong blind picks on the patch, where the strong blind picks on the patch, if I recall correctly, was Gwen and Gangplank, and then Gnar just slightly below that. Whoever got the choice of blind pick within that tiering order would then have the advantage in that game itself. And it's somewhat similar as well, I think, now with Aatrox and I think Gnar being the two premier. I'm not sure about Gnar, but Aatrox is definitely up there for the top lane. Actually, it's slightly different. Sorry, it's only Aatrox now that's only premier blind pick top laner, right? So maybe that's where this whole like blue side dynamic comes in once again. The reason why I don't feel as good about RNG was that when I was watching T1 when they were playing MSI, I felt that Owner was a liability in those games, and Wei was an asset. Whereas now that I'm watching the group stage so far, of course, once again with all the asterisks, it's the other way around, right? Where Wei is, he likes to go for these invades, right? And it almost feels like I'm watching Rizark from Fnatic when Rizark was completely inting his team. He's got no prior in his lanes, he's just invading and stuff like that. The only difference was that when Wei was doing that at MSI, he was outplaying those situations, and it just looked really impressive, right? That I'm recalling the Viego versus Wukong game where he does 3 camps, runs into the red buff, fights the Wukong off the Wukong's red buff, while mid and top doesn't have prio. Faker gets first move, but he flashes the charm, and then they outplay the situation, and the game's very much in RNG's favor from that point. And I see him doing similar things as well, and he beats up on like weaker junglers like Gemini doing that from the Flying Oysters team. But when he tried it against Gen.G, I think Peanut's a little bit too good for him for that to be successfully put off, because that was my recollection of the RNG Gen.G game, right? Was that this came down to Wei doing things that I think were just not right as a jungler, where he could have just gone for a more efficient clear, played a lot more similarly to how Cannon could have played at that point of time, and just punished certain decisions that Peanut had made prior to that. But he went for this invade, and I think that from that point it just looked very weird, and it was him who was getting punished at the point of time. So that's my kind of read on it, but I don't really know, because was that because of the fact that they're sick? Are they going to be correcting these plays as well? Because I do know that when I was watching the RNG versus DFM series, when I watched game 1, it wasn't very impressive. They're like making some macro errors, but within the set itself, they were able to correct for that. So it's really hard to count RNG out. If anything, there's lots of veterancy on the roster, and I think that this is a team that definitely understands the idea of that the meta evolves as the tournament progresses, and they have shown that they are able to adapt to the meta as it goes along. So at the end of the day, if you were to force me to pick, I would probably go with T1, but I don't think it's as clear cut as what people are saying, right? If I'm looking at the Pick'em's website, it's like 90% of people think that T1 is going to win. is not going to be anywhere close to that. This is another series where you really can't tell, right? I think it goes back to what Rich says, right? I don't really think you can pick clear favorites because of how group stages and because of the summer playoffs meta being so different from this Worlds meta.
Give us your take then, Rich. Come on.
Yeah, so on the T1 thing, something that fans really need to keep in mind is that, like, for example, they published, or a certain publication published, the World's group viewership stuff. And in the West, this was only Western figures because everyone knows Chinese figures are a complete fucking meme. The most watched team was T1. So even in the West, like, T1 is still like this super popular team that everyone watches. And that will also be reflected, as Jensen said, in something like betting. Like, you are just humanistically more likely to bet on a team that you like if they give you any reason to believe, right? Like, in the same way that I would probably bet on Rogue if I was going to place one bet, but also because the fucking odds are absurd. So yeah, when it comes to this matchup, I do agree that, like, we can't do MMA maths here and be like, well, Gen.G made RNG look ordinary, so blah, blah, blah. Well, when last I checked, Gen.G made SKT look ordinary as well, right? So it's kind of, we can't read anything really into this cross-group analysis. As I said at the very start, I think you have to just judge teams on the basis of their pieces and their cohesion in the context of the games that we've already seen. And to, again, what Jensen said, junglers quite often do this. You can argue that Peanut's done this a little bit to a certain extent as well, where Owners had this trajectory graph of when people, if people remember, when Owner came onto the scene and was playing like his first high-profile best-of series, he looked really fucking good. Like, arguably the best jungler in the world was like an opinion, right? And then he had a sort of quite big down trajectory. For Peanut, you could argue that was a couple of years, although I would say a lot of that was also the circumstances of the team he was on or whatever. But now Owner is one of the happy surprises, I would say, of this team. Everyone knew Zeus was going to be really good, although people were basically saying, it's the T1 top laners and then Zeus, whereas actually I feel like Zeus is probably the best of all the top laners, possibly. Like, based on this world, as I said, I think 369's been really good as well, but Zeus to me is like the most reliable for sure. Also worth mentioning, again, even though, they had like Cloud9 in their group or whatever, like, he has played 6 unique champions. He's played a unique champion in every game. And again, to Jensen's point earlier, he covers the full spectrum of any way the meta's going to go. This guy has you fucking covered, right? This is nuts. He's played Gangplank, Jace, Yone, Aatrox, and Jax, and Fiora. So he's played like all of the, you don't know which way it's going, but he can play anything. He can play all the reverse matchups as well. Obviously, he can play fucking Maokai if he wanted to as well. I'm sure that's not beyond his wheelhouse, right? And if you go back like a little bit further into like LCK playoffs, he's playing all the other traditional shit as well. Of course, he can play he can play the Nars. So I think that top lane is going to be like, again, another sort of key matchup here, or top side, I should say, because Wei hasn't looked quite where you would want him to be, feeling confident going to this matchup with Owner, whereas Owner's been shit hot. And that top side looks really strong for SKT. I think people have and this will be to the surprise of nobody, have been mega overrating Faker's performance at Worlds. I think he's been fine, by the way, and like good in certain games. But to me, it's actually sad to watch Faker play now. And I'm saying that even given that I still think he's still a top 10 mid in the world. Like, he's still a very elite player, but he has looked what was it, the first game they lost at Worlds, or I guess the only game they lost in groups, he looked awful. And he's been making some really like fundamental mistakes, even in laning and certain things that historically you would never associate him with, but he's been getting caught out in fog of war in like the first few minutes of games. Like, he has been bailed out to a certain extent by Owner, I believe, who's been having to fix his lane sometimes as well. Like, I think you'd have seen even more dominant performances from Owner if Faker had been more solid. Again, I don't think he's been bad, but I do actually think that is like a weak point. Now, the big weak point that everyone would point to before the tournament would obviously be Gumiyashi. I was going to say Gumiyashi and Kiria, but Gumiyashi really. And he's been okay. Like, he's been fine. Like, he's not done anything to make me think like, wow, he's what he was hyped to be when he first came onto the scene or whatever. But he's fine. But I still think bot lane is like a big win condition for RNG, right? Like, I feel like this is where you have to attack them. As I said, I think mid lane is exploitable as well. I do think because if SKT play how I think they will play, I would prioritize bot lane over mid lane, because I think Owner's going to be in the vicinity generally on things that can counter jungle or be decent in the 2v2. So I do think that bot lane is more of a win condition. And again, I mean, I could easily see this going to 5 games. Like, I would favor SKT based on what I've seen. The best way I can put it is SKT have been noticeably better than I thought they probably would be before the tournament. And I've been slightly disappointed with RNG. I thought RNG were maybe like a dark horse who could actually just run the whole thing. I don't really feel that now, because even though this isn't the matchup, I do think Gen.G did expose something. And at the very least, to me, somewhat showed, and not just because of the results, but in terms of how they played, that they are a more solid all-round team right now than RNG. So their stock has gone down a little bit for me, whereas SKT's has gone up. And before the tournament, I would have said it would probably be very close, but maybe give RNG the edge. Now I do think you give SKT the edge. But again, probably going to be a banging series. I think 3-1 or 3-2, I'd say SKT. Oh, sorry, T1.
It's T1, but all right, it's okay. We let that one go. What I'll say is this: I totally agree on the Faker point. By the way, sadly, it's a phenomenon that happens in my native CS:GO all the time. Basically, it goes like this: formerly the best or the absolute elite level player is still pretty good, and so every time they have a game, he's back. Like spoiler, he doesn't have to be back if he's that good. If you're that good, you're just that good every day of the week. Like the joke is, if you're Knight or Trophy, it's the other way around. If you have a bad game, people are like, something wrong. Is what's going on? Like that's the test, guys. If you're having a go, if you're pulling up screenshots and going, look at this game from him though, then he isn't the best. Because when you're the best, you don't have screenshots. It's every game here. It's like just watch the last month, pick a game at random, you'll see how good they get. So they don't have like the super mid carry. Luckily, in this particular series though, obviously Zhao Hu's not like the god fucking laner who's going to destroy you. But I actually do think the interesting factor for me is this: RNG is one of my favourite teams to watch. I even thought in last year with the top lane swap, it was really interesting. But this one now, where they've gotten basically a better set of like overall carry lanes in terms of they have the real top laner as well, not that like whack shit with the mid laner last year, right? The coolest thing about RNG is this is why everyone got baited by that fucking playing series against DFM. They just like play to the level of their opponent. Like if their opponent is some like lower teams, then they'll have like a messy fucking series. It's all over the place. But they can play the best teams and they can play awesome against them as well. So I actually think like that's why that Gen.G shot wasn't that great a shock to me. Yeah, Gen.G is the best team, but RNG just looks like one of the teams where there's a reason why people say they're the most fucking LCK-like of the LPL teams. They just know how to sort of like, they understand how you tactically play against opponents. They aren't the team actually like the other squads for me out the LPL that just play their style and they're like, fuck you, damned if you do, damned if you don't, whatever. We're just going to do our style and then you just, no. Like what I love about this team is Zhao Hu and Ming look like two of the smartest players I've ever seen, especially in international play, mate. These guys just figure out like how to move on the map together. That's the thing with the way guy like you're talking about. I even think that Fnatic game against T1 is like the fucking blueprint. So Razork was just trying to go and find all these like picks and they were just swarming in the Fnatic players. That's exactly what they did when RNG played against Gen.G. Like the joke was if anyone just went into like the jungle of the fog of war who was from the side of fucking from the side of Gen.G, like they just got like insta-ganked by like 3 players. It was like Wei was just joined by like Ming, in comes Zhao Hu, and the best thing about Zhao Hu as well, because obviously the support roams, but Zhao Hu even does those picks in draft where it's like this guy has no ego. He isn't trying to pick the shit that smashes you in lane. He will just go straight into the Lissandra. If it was at MSI, Galio for me, please, because he's not playing that. They're playing the map, mate. They're playing you. Like I think they play the man, basically. That's back in Quake. We used to have a term. Do you play the map? Like I like this map. I like these. They play the man. They try to like figure out their opponent, what he's doing. How they. So I do think that for me, they're like the bar, basically. And what I think happens here is if T1 turns up and they're amazing, then yeah, they probably win this series. But if they have any issues, if they have any hint from any of those players, if fucking Zeus isn't the super carry everyone says he's going to be, if we have a little bit of dodgy games from Gumiyoshi, if Faker just does okay, the door's open. Like I'm interested in this one. That's why for me, I would take RNG just as if you want like a cheeky underdog pick. Like this is one of the underdogs where actually they might end up looking like they were the favourite with the way they could play. But I'll take T1 as well. Sure.
You know what the saddest thing about this matchup is that if I don't have a dog in the fight or like a team that I'm really heavily backing for whatever reason, I quite often will just root for greatness, because I think whenever you can like increase the grandeur or the greatness of either a team or an individual player, I think it can elevate everything else. So like historically, I would want Faker like to win, right? Because to me, and you won't like this reference, Thorin, but
he's
for example,
Tom Brady
like when Tom Brady was 28-3 down or whatever it was to the Atlanta Falcons and he came back, I thought that was like kind of awesome because you're chucking the yardstick so far out, even if it's, not from an ability standpoint, but an achievement standpoint, that I think that's like a cool thing and like a cool thing to watch. So like I would quite often default to supporting T1 because I just thought like as much as you can enhance and enrich like the folklore around Faker, that would be a good thing, even if people do like fuck around with the context or whatever. But ever since Joe fucking Marsh has come into that organization, I just can't do it anymore. As much as I love Faker and I root for greatness, like he's just ruined all the fun for me. And the sad thing is apparently he hasn't ruined it for that many other people because everyone still fucking watches him. I'm just hoping for maybe it's a bit of a Mayweather angle now where everyone just watches him to see Joe Marsh lose because fuck me, that guy's the most annoying cunt in the scene. Holy shit. But yeah, I'm rooting for RNG in this one because as you said as well, Thorin, I think they're just fun. Like there's more interesting team. If T1 play to the best level they can and win, that's not interesting, is it? And again, it's not going to be, spoiler alert, it's not going to be Game 5 Faker LeBlanc like popping off on people. It's going to be some fucking boring, meticulous, going through the motions, system well played League of Legends and telling Kyria in fucking well, probably Kira as well, in Gumiyashi's ear saying, don't in. That's like the win condition. So that's not interesting, is it? So yeah, RNG all the way. Hashtag RNG win.
I'm definitely with you guys on that, right? Like, if I were to go back to talking about the way that I look at the game, the LPL teams, especially RNG and EDG, both of these two teams are good at doing that. But going back to my point as to why it hasn't been working is because the meta just doesn't seem to reward that at this point of time. I can see ways that RNG is still outplays T1 on the map and stuff, but why I'm still concerned about it is it's really hard for me to tell because there's just so many. It's hard to really look at RNG week 2 performance at Worlds and say that this is indicated for how RNG is going to play. And a part of me wants to give them the benefit of the doubt because I still think that this is still a good team. They know how to overload on the side lanes. They know how to aggressively walk into the jungle and find picks. And I still think that the Korean support and junglers are still going to be very vulnerable to that because they still do this 1-2 formation where the support and jungle are not connected. So RNG will be able to find picks with that, but would that be enough for them to win the game? And that's where I'm not too sure. And one more thing that I notice about is that the way that T1 has been playing is that I think this is the time where it might be T1 who is not say sandbagging, but they're kind of hiding strats, right? Because I think that they played like one style throughout most of the tournament, and then for the one that determined whether they advance as first seed or second seed, they changed the style that they approach with, right? Where all of a sudden, where they're doing this Sejuani, Akali, Fiora, or like this triple melee compositions, and then they went into playing a Victor Gangplank in the very last game against EDG. So they have showed a little bit of depth as well in terms of the way that they're drafting. And of course, this is a team that can play Silver Yumi, but it's, in principle, I don't like to root for the team that just picks scaling champions across the board and then just waits for the 35-minute team fight because it's a very boring way to play the game.
Yes. Right, okay, if we go then, like, the match that everyone's hyped is the Gen.G Dom 1, because as Monty, one of the things Monty was always really good at is he knows basically, like, he's always good at doing matchups and win conditions, and then he always keeps a narrative, this is why you know he's brilliant on desks, he knows how to keep the same narrative you've already heard, so you think, I know it's coming now, but then he adds, like, a little bit of extra tweak to it, and he, like, updates the narrative, and he sort of keeps you going with where it's at. So obviously, the point he's made all year long, which was correct, is that Dam 1 is actually the team that, for some reason, stylistically just works the best anywhere Gen.G, even though Gen.G was the best. Now, the part that always gets lost there is he always compares them, because this would have been the other opponent, T1 versus Dam 1 or Gen.G versus Dam 1. The real point to drive it home that he doesn't make is Dam 1 is better against Gen.G than T1 is, even though technically T1 was the second best team. So that was like the interesting detail. It's why they didn't pick them in the playoffs. It's why when they had like the close games, they did almost lose to them. I know they lost to T1 for real. It was the one team that beat them in the split, but that was like a wonky game where they sort of like still had the monkey on their back and they choked a little bit and they sort of they just messed up the game 3, if you remember. So basically, like, this should be a matchup on paper that's really interesting. I know everyone's going, it's boring, like, who wants to see a regional matchup? Like, but actually the point is, this is one where as analysts, you have something to go off. We're not just like going in a black box of like, well, T1 against Gen.G, but then on week 1 and week 2, but then over here, the RNG rather, like, you can't, that is MMA math. That is almost impossible to do. That's why for me, like, I like the Jensen approach. He's basically just looking for like, this is the way they try to play. How will that work against how I propose this other team? Not like they're going to do exactly what happened in this last game because they're playing a different team. So Jensen, start me off on this one. Everyone's going to say on paper, Gen.G again, massive favourite. I know Dan1. The problem Dan1 has as a team is they haven't, for people who don't watch the LCK, well, they're not in these finals. They're not winning LCK. So I think everyone actually from the West seems like they've taken the failure of them to go have the dynasty last Worlds and win in the finals. And they know that like they changed some players out and then Niguri came back, but is he that good now? And so they heard all these bad things. And I think as a result, a lot of Westerners seem super down on Dan1, like, who gives a fuck, who cares, blah, blah, blah. But I even thought they looked pretty good in their group, mate. Like they were looking like they could have beaten JDG in some of the games I was saying. So how do you see this one matched up, Gen.G and Dan1?
I actually have, like, okay, so when it comes to Dan1, if I'm just going to look at 4 players on the team, right? Okay, fine, not 4 players, 3 players on the team, I'm going to look at the top side of the map. I'm going to look at how the top side of the map plays. Dan1 is actually going to be my pick to win Worlds. Ooh, and then I will go Dom, right? And Dom, this guy makes me want to pull my hair out when I watch Dan1 play, because I feel that this guy is wasting Showmaker's prime. This year can be Showmaker's year, it can be Canyon's year. Like, you know how all these LPL teams, they play in a very idiosyncratic manner and then they hope the meta aligns up with them. This meta is perfect for Nuguri, Canyon, and Showmaker, and all Dr. has to do is do his job in the team fights, position properly, not try to overreach, and randomly get one shot by an Aatrox, but he just has been finding ways to throw games. And I was watching the regional playoffs as well, and I just feel that this guy just looks so lost on the map at some points of time. It's actually frustrating to watch, because I actually think that this team is actually capable of so much greatness, right? Like I think that this is unfortunate that Dan1 and EDG might be meeting on the same side of the bracket, right? Because I actually have EDG as the most LCK-like of the LPL teams, and Dan1 is the most LPL-like of the LCK teams, where they play 2 lanes into 2 lane rather than you have this 3 lane into 2 lane approach that a lot of the LCK teams tend to go with, right? Or in the case of Gen.G, 3 lanes into 1 lane, back into 3 lanes, right? Whereas for the way the Dan1 plays is that they know how to play around side lanes, they know how to enable side lanes. I did this video about why Akali hasn't really been working for the LCK teams in the first week when DRX played it, and when I think it was T1 that lost with it against Fnatic as well, right? Dan1 is a team that they will play the LeBlanc, and this LeBlanc is not going to be your like front to back team fighting LeBlanc. This LeBlanc is going to be exerting pressure on the side lanes. They can Showmaker will be able to pull off the Akali. This is one of the teams that I think in the double bruiser or assassin plus bruiser type of meta, they would be the most well-positioned LCK team. And that's probably the reason why I actually have them winning this series against Gen.G. I actually feel that Gen.G, it really looks like their read on the meta is very limited at this point of time. Once again, you can't really tell for sure with the way that once you've qualified, you don't necessarily have to sweat it and show everybody your hand at a point of time. But looking at the hands, I think he's very locked into the enchanted side of things. And all of a sudden, you're facing against Dan1 style. And I think Cannon's playing really well right now. There's Graves in the meta and stuff. It's looking like a Dan1 win to me in this game. Sorry if the argument was a little bit all over the place, right? But to parse it properly, is that I actually think that Gen.G's bot lane, they looked very strong in the playoffs because of what they were afforded. But I think that this meta is very open to interpretation. I think Lehans doesn't really have that wide champion pool, right? So once again, it's the opposite of the Trimby effect, where you can actually abuse Gen.G's bot lane because you know he's going to play Yumi, he's going to play Renata, he's going to play an Enchanter, or he's going to play Singed, right? And at most he goes into trash or something. And that can actually even kind of cover for Dr. and Kellen. Whereas those style champions, I think, are stylistically weaker against what Nuguri and Showmaker have been playing in the solo lanes as well. So if we are going to talk about can Thorin hold up against Nuguri, or stylistically can Gen.G deal with how Dan1 has been playing the game, I think both on blue side and red side, I think this is something that's going to be in Dan1's favor.
Okay. Come on then, Rich, hit me with it.
So the thing is, I agree with a lot of what you said, but I have a complete opposite conclusion. So I agree that like top side, obviously like Nuguri, Canyon, Showmaker, that's like not going to be a bad matchup for anyone, right? And I also would say that to me, and this is why historically, I know this has changed over the last year because I think Chovy has been really fucking good over the last year or whatever. I've always been more in the Showmaker camp than the Chovy camp. And I think that especially, I think Showmaker regardless of what the result of this series is, I think I will look at it and say, I still think Showmaker's better than Chovy. I just think that he reads him well in lane, and I think he always matches up well, regardless of if they win the game or lose the game. So I agree, like, top side, I think Damwon Kia, at worst, it's a wash. At best, they have an edge. But I just think that, I mean, I agree with the bot lane, but the problem is, I just think that Kia's bot lane is so unreliable. And on their day, if you take every player at their best, so far below Ruler and Lehens that I just can't believe that, 40% of the team is going to, it's just too big an anchor. It's just too big an anchor. So I'm actually going to say it's going to be minimum 3-1 Gen.G. I wouldn't be surprised if it's 3-0. I just don't think they can overcome that. I also think that, Lehens, like, I don't want to see Singe. Like, I think if Ruler is enabled and Lehens just plays champions that enable Ruler, or a sort of, default vanilla, whatever, and they don't get too far in their own heads. Yes, I take the limited champion pool. I do think that's could be a legitimate concern, but I think Gen.G is also capable of exploiting that level of priority on the bot lane in the other positions. So for me, I just feel that, again, I co-sign most of what you said, but I just think that the bot lane discrepancy is too large, and I trust Ruler to show himself to be the Ruler we've seen for the last however long, and I think that'll be the primary difference. I think you might even see Chovy, again, sort of like a mini lukewarm take or whatever. I think you might see Chovy even starting to sacrifice himself a little bit in the series to enable other parts of the map if he doesn't think he's going to get over on mid, which, again, I just think this mid lane matchup's kind of a wash. And even if Chovy is the best player in the world, I actually don't think it's that particularly relevant, or could be maybe not as relevant as people might think it will be against someone like Showmaker. So yeah, I think Gen.G are heavily favoured, I have to say.
It's funny that obviously because the week one went so badly for Gen.G initially and they came in as the tournament favourite. I know now everyone, this is how whack people are. Now people are spinning it like everyone was saying no one said Top's going to win Worlds. Not a single LPL person was like, I'll sign up for Top Esports. Like nobody, because it's fucking Top Esports. You don't watch the LPL or something, you idiots. Like they're literally the number one. They're like the rogue of the fucking LPL. They'll always break your heart when it's the big moment. Just when they win the series, that makes you believe they can do it now. That's when all the razors go in the cake and you just fucking eat the whole thing and you just, bloody hell again, I've done it again. So the joke is, like, Gen.G really did look amazing coming into this tournament. Week one, they looked not that good. They took care, as you'd expect with a true Korean elite team. They just took care of week two, took care of absolutely every single team, no problem. Get them all out there. And so I actually do think coming in, like I'm going to pitch it to Jensen in a second, but I really do think there's a world where they just come in and they just murk Damwon and that all this other stuff. It's a bit like what I was doing with the RNG one. It's like, well, if T1 has problems, and then if this player's inexperienced shows, and then if they get in a position where you can sort of outthink them and move on. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of ifs there though. The difference is if Gen.G turns up, and this is the reason why I do think they're going to win this series. I think they're going to win Worlds. I don't give a fuck. The reason why I think they will win Worlds is because they actually have the most basic blueprint to win Worlds, and it works. It has worked very consistently, and it is based around also having the two best players in the tournament as a 1-2 punch, which is obviously going to be Ruler and Chovy. Nobody has anything to contest those players. If those players can get the champions they want, get through the laning phase like they can, by the way, normally they just lane like motherfuckers, and they just get to the positions where they can have these fights, good luck beating them. Like the point was in Korea, the reason it almost became a boring split, it isn't that there was no competition, like 2, 3, 4. There was a lot of competition. The DRX ended up going to Worlds. Outside of Gen.G, there was all sorts of competition. There was only Damwon with this weird playing style had any chance against Gen.G. Like going into the playoffs. That's why Monty did that ridiculous bet, which look, obviously he's terrible bankroll management. He was doing it as like marketing as a big hype. He put like 10k on Gen.G to win that final. Whereas you can imagine they were on like, I'm going to guess like 1.3 odds or something ridiculous. Like, don't ever do that if you're betting at home. Like, that's ridiculous. But when he was doing it to just show you, like, essentially, I will bet my house on it, as it were. Like, they're just going to win. It's so, in fact, it's so boring. I'm just going to bet loads on them anyway because fuck it, I'm going to win anyway. There's no point betting on the loser. Doesn't matter what the odds are. Like, it was almost a statement. So basically, I think it's up to Gen.G. If Gen.G turns up and plays like that, I think all these great hypotheticals about Damwon just go out the window. If Damwon can get past this one, look, then they can cause problems for everyone in the tournament. They do have another super unorthodox team, but I just do think like Gen.G can play the most boring League of Legends and just win doing that. That's another thing people don't like to talk about. I can see why people love T1. They also have that super fucking cool playing style, and it's clearly not just like you play through this one lane. Like that in the movie, that's what you'd pick because it's intellectually stimulating, it's exciting. The problem is you wouldn't make a movie about Gen.G. It'd be boring as fuck. It'd be one of those teams that starts the season, they're the best, they win almost every week, they lose one close game in week 8, then they win all the playoff games by a 10-point margin, and then they just go like, yeah, well, I mean, I'm not even that excited. I won, your turn. Yeah, we all won. Like, let's see if we can do it again next year. Like, that'd be a whack movie, but guess what? Sometimes games are like that. And sometimes Worlds is like that. Sometimes Worlds becomes boring. The teams just roll through everyone. So I do with Gen.G get like sort of old school T1 vibes of like, of course they're going to win these series. Like you almost have, in fact, there's another thing. Just like I said about the players where if they're like truly great, you actually start trying to go like, oh, but they had one bad game. That's what we're doing with Gen.G now. Like now we're starting to go like, oh, but if there's any possible weakness, like if someone exploited that, it's like a chance to be a fine thing. So I'm going to flip it back to you, Jensen. How does Damwon have to hope Gen.G just doesn't come in peak form? Can they actually like inhibit them? Can they stop them being able to get to the point I'm talking about?
Oh, I think definitely so, because I think Gen.G is definitely very overhyped, especially because of how summer playoffs look. Because summer playoffs is the perfect meta for a team like Gen.G, right? Yuumi, Silver Zeri, that's the perfect thing for them. So, and then they come in, they play against. They did drop a game to RNG as well, right? I probably need to. I don't recall what the details of that game was, or if that
was when they just got wrecked at the beginning of the game. Like I think RNG was just wrecking like the first 4 or 5 minutes, just way ahead.
Is it true? Is it true way doing things? Possibly.
It was all like ganks of like mid fucking jungle support and that, I think.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, this is ages ago, obviously.
Yeah. So if I recall, sorry, not to recall, but if I were to think about the way the Damwon plays, right, I think that the meta now favors Damwon more than it favors Gen.G as compared to summer playoffs. And in terms of like getting there, I think the blueprint of the game will look a lot more closer to Damwon versus JDG than Gen.G versus T1. Right, or Gen.G versus any of the other teams that have played so far, because other than RNG, the rest of the teams in Gen.G's group, they just play a similar style. Okay, we're gonna try to play lane as good as we can, and then we're trying to scale. We're gonna try to team fight against you, and then they just get absolutely murked by Gen.G. But Damwon doesn't play into that, so you're gonna have this stylistic difference. I think Damwon is going to prioritize Harrow a lot more. This game will come down to Drake 3, Drake 4 type of contest, where Damwon will have these pushing side lanes in against Gen.G. And I think that Gen.G has shown weaknesses when both side lanes are pushed in, or one side lane is pushed in terms of how they respond on the map to that. And that game was won by JDG. I thought that Damwon should have been the first seed in Group B when they play against JDG, and I think that against Gen.G they will be able to recreate similar situations as well, unless we see an absolute gap in the bot lane. So for those reasons, that's the reason why I think Damwon's style will firstly create a deviating blueprint from what we have seen from Gen.G so far, and put them into positions where they have the better setup, they have a better position, and it really comes down to the draft. It comes down to how they execute on those team fights, where Gen.G then has to outplay Damwon in those team fights. So that's my take on it, right? Maybe they do, maybe that's like I said, maybe that is what the meta rewards at the end of the day, and then Chovy really ascends to greatness and he finds a 5-man ulti or something. But in terms of how I see this game and what I understand about this game, disconnect the support and jungle, failure to answer side lanes properly are going to be the big reasons why Damwon wins this series against Gen.G.
Right, Rich, we'll go to the last series now, the DRX EDG one. I want to start with you on this one, because obviously I think this is also where people don't watch those Asian regions, because you'd have to have gone pretty deep to know how good these teams are. These aren't the big names. Some of these ones might not even have been at Worlds. That's the scenario they were in. So these are the ones where I notice there's the least interest around this particular matchup. Yeah. There's the least hype. So what's your angle on it? What's your angle on EDG DRX?
I think EDG are heavy favourites. Part of this is based on my own observable research, and also part of it is based on leaning on, for example, when I did the team rankings with Monty, sure, part of it is showmanship or whatever, but the DRX supposedly were like just didn't even deserve to be there, was the large take before Worlds. And having watched their games, like I think a lot of people, probably Monty included, would even say that like maybe they've looked better than they did in the LCK Gauntlet, or specifically in summer. But I feel like if you contextualize the 2 games in groups which they won, which mattered, let's say, One is the second Rogue game where Rogue played where the game was over like immediately, and then Tez when Tez was not Tez, if that's fair to say, like just a horrible like week one read. Like I don't feel like they've shown me anything spectacular yet where I'm like, okay, this is now suddenly like a contending team. I think the thing with EDG, which I'd be most concerned about if I was a DRX fan, is that their supposed biggest weakness, and I sort of highlighted this earlier, coming into the tournament was Flandre, right? And I think Flandre has been very good. People might not have long enough memories to remember that Flandre actually did used to be really good in the past as well, but obviously not been so good in the past year or so. But Flandre has looked really good since he's come in. He's relied a little bit on the Fiora maybe, but which you can argue, you know, when you're matching up against Chinese teams and so on, won't work as well. But obviously it's he's now playing against an LCK team. I expect his form to continue to be what I've seen so far. I think that they're basically strong everywhere now. I mean, GG's had a couple of interesting games, let's say, but Scout is just like a very solid mid laner who I think matches up well against anyone in the world, quite frankly. Viper, this is the only small thing I would have disagreed with what you said earlier, Thorin. I think Vipers are better than Ruler. I think they're the two best for sure, but I just think Viper is so fucking good at League of Legends.
I mean, by the way, I do mean as a 1-2 punch, though.
Oh, sorry. Okay, then yeah, but regardless, I just think this guy is so fucking good at League of Legends, and it was in what game was it? It was in the Fnatic game where, the Fnatic game where they had the bug, the Darius bug. But the way he was playing these fights was like fucking mind blowing. Like, go back and watch those fights, because if people forget, it was a very close game. Fnatic was actually ahead for portions of that game. So a lot of these fights, it's on him because he's the guy who has to be staying alive and dishing out the damage, but also positioning aggressively enough that he can't just be, trying to survive and last it as he's cutting away. And he's going in and out. It's fucking nuts. Like, I think this guy has shown the highest level of skill expression at Worlds so far. And yeah, I just think, as I said, I would have liked them beforehand anyway, based a lot on the conjecture of what the perception of DRX was going in, but also based on how play-ins and groups have gone. I think DRX have been fine. Like, absolutely. I think they're not a bad team, but I like this matchup a lot for EDG, principally because I thought they were a better team beforehand anyway, and they've shored up what was their biggest weakness, which now is probably actually an advantage for them in this matchup, weirdly. And where are they weaker? I mean, they're stronger in bot lane if we just go like position for position. Mid, I guess you can make an argument, but I just think because of the laning deficiencies, I think you have to give it to Scout, in my opinion. And I think, now they have an advantage topside. So for me, EDG comfortably favored in this one. I would be surprised if it was 5 games. 3-1, 3-0 EDG. 3-1, 3-1. I wouldn't give EDG that much credit to not think they won't fuck up a game. 3-1.
Yeah, I actually think that EDG are big favorites as well. But I want to hop it on the engulf Flandre a little bit, right? Because I think Flandre is the opposite of a lot of these. A lot of the Asian players when they play at big events, where Asian players will experience a lot of stress, a lot of pressure. Whereas I think Flandre's performance, which is one of the things that I always thought was a little bit more interesting. I mean, of course, I don't know this 100% for sure, but just from observing the way that he plays, hearing the way that people talk about him, it's always like, if Flandre cares, if Flandre wants to win, then he can win, Is that if you, there's this model of like stress and performance, right? Where you have a bell curve, and at the very center is where you are able to perform at your best, but you experience the right amount of stimulation, right? If you're overly stressed, you're overly stimulated, you tend to choke because your fight or flight kicks in. But if you're not stressed enough, and there's something that people don't realize, is that you can actually be under stressed as well, is that you don't care and you go into autopilot. And I've always felt that watching Flandre, that has been his problem, right? He loses focus, he doesn't feel stimulated enough in these games. Now, of course, this is, I'm not a sports psychologist and stuff like that, but I've always felt that one of the things that Western teams have that the Eastern teams don't spend enough focus on is probably resources like that to help a player like Flandre, right? That this is, his inconsistency comes about not because from a lack of presence of mind, not because he's a choker, but he just sometimes it feels like he doesn't care about the game, and that's my general read on Flandre, and which is why I think that when it comes to playing at Worlds, that problem fixes itself, right? Because the stakes go up, he plays against better opposition, he will look down on his opponents, and then he will be stimulated to play the game accordingly. But with regards to the rest of the map, I haven't really taken a deep dive into like DRX and how do they play the game. I know the broadcast has been calling them the fifth LPL team because basically what was it, 4 or is it all of their players have played the LPL before, right? But my impression is that I think that EDG should be the favorites because across the map I think they're just the better team.
Like the big problem I have with my read on EDG is it's the same reason why I think they were so slept on last Worlds, whereas people will know I literally did pick them as my team from before the quarters began to win Worlds. And the reason why was I actually think they have what is a really hard team to pull off, but it's in theory one of the best ways you could play the game, which is they have all the players, like as in they don't have like a one player you must, like even though they have Viper, you don't have to only play through Viper. It's not like when Mystic used to play in the LPL and the whole team was like oozy eye shit of like, just get Mystic in the team fight and fucking peel. Like it wasn't like that. Like in this team, they played through Flandre when they wanted to and he had the Graves last year in top lane. If they wanted to through mid lane, Scout actually was doing really well last Worlds. He was like a sleeper MVP of the whole fucking thing. He was looking awesome. There, the JJ guy smurfed a little bit too much. Maybe that was an overperformance. But by the way, Mako will forever, because here's the thing, in the same way as you notice in a European League of Legends, is always my angle. Everyone with fucking eyes can see the guy who goes aggro and plays fucking silence mid lane or plays pike support. It's obvious your fucking eyes are telling you he's popping off. What you can't see, because it's hidden in nuance, is when a fucking Orianna player is popping off, when someone who is playing a Nami is popping off, because by definition they don't look like they are popping off. They're just like gradually applying like pressure and overall advantages and damage, and it's only at the end of the game you're like, bloody hell, why did the other team never get in that game? So Mako will forever be underrated, by the way. Whereas Ming, when he goes ham, it's obvious he's a fucking sicko. Mako will always be the one where it's like, oh, it was just all Viper. It's like, no, bro, like this guy is another bona fide like legend Hall of Fame guy who's still good now. He's still good now. Remember, the joke was he used to be with Deft all those fucking years ago at Worlds. They're both there now. So I actually think the thing about EDG is they can almost choose, like, I don't think the meta can destroy them. I don't think they can just get taken out by one team. I think they're going to match up against everyone they play pretty well. Then the thing about the DRX side is this. I personally think they're just a paper tiger. Bear in mind, they won their group, and it was a group that had like the best EU team and then one of the best Chinese teams. I don't give a fuck. Like, Rogue fell apart in week 2 and Top didn't even look good until they weren't in the tournament anymore. Like, I don't really care about DRX's performance. Then I look, their mid laner is just literally getting to pick the 2 champions he's fucking good on. And then even then, it's not like he just destroys everyone. He just does well. So I look at their team. The joke is they are the most boring LCK team. I can see why Monty likes them on some level, because they just play like the fucking by the numbers League of Legends. Like, right, it's actually how every fan complains on Reddit. They want their team to play if their team's Fnatic or some top esports. But the truth is you don't. It'd be the most boring League of Legends ever. Like, here's what you want. When your team gets a team wipe on the opponent, so there's one guy left or the death tab, you want them to base race and rush there and try and fucking knock the towers down and have a really big fight under the towers as the guys are coming off the spawn and see to the end of the game. You don't want them to go, right, really boring, like, let's check our portfolio, let's go back and check the dragon, and then Baron's in 2 minutes, set up vision and check that their vision. You don't want that, because that's actually not sexy. What's sexy in League of Legends, I've always thought this, is fucking team fights. It's why I knew people were just biased against the LPL. Everything they told me they wanted from League of Legends, the LPL always gave you, like action, ganks, fighting, skirmishing, get one player, give him the ego through the roof and just give him the carry champion. So fuck it, 1v9. Everything you guys want was always there, but because it isn't with like Kobe and Freak telling you this is what you like, and because it isn't like, I am from America, I am an American hero, because it's not all the fucking TV WWE shit. You can't take it. It's not palatable to you. The joke is it's actually like Chinese food. You don't know what Chinese food is. You have it in America, by the way. It's got all like fucking grease and salt and all shit. It's just like some fucked up like cartoon version of it. If you ever go to China, it tastes totally different, mate. Like, it doesn't have the same strength of flavour. The spices are different. So people just don't have the palate for the LPL. So basically, I don't think people actually know what IDG is good at. I think they just still think like, I mean, Scout was like the fakest pro. That's just a good narrative. There's nothing to do with how they play the game. So I think their team's mad balanced and always has been. I think the best thing about that is, unlike every other bloody team in the universe, they go to Worlds and the meta can't just crush them flat. They could play badly. So for me, the problem with DRX is I think they're the most basic bitch team in the whole fucking tournament. I think it's a joke they're even in this part of the tournament. The only reason I was taking them on SI is because they're fucking underdogs and whatever. If I get them a good odds, I might go with them in that sense. But I don't believe they can actually win. I think DRX has the lanes to win. I don't think they have the team to win. I don't think they have the champions. I don't even think if you're EDG, you need to like pinch a lane. No, you can just fucking draft the better champions, mate. You're going to win this series. So, Jensen, come on, hit me. Is there some angle there you want to jump in on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way you describe EDG is they're a chameleon, right? So when I looked at the stylistic matchup between EDG and Domon last year, I had to draw like a whole matrix of possibilities in terms of how these teams might match up against each other before I came to a conclusion, which is unlike what I had to do for other teams, whereas very clearly this is the style, this is the blueprint, this is what you can expect. So, but I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head, right? With regards to EDG, they're just better players across the board. I don't think DRX, they reveal any form of potency in terms of like being particularly effective, like the way Gen.G plays, where they're going to hit this late game scaling, team fights and stuff like that. I mean, they're basic, they're boring, and they don't even achieve that, right? And neither are they like Damwon, where they can have this play on two lanes that can really contest EDG's play on the side lanes as well. So I think that across the board, from early game to mid game, and even in the team fighting, EDG is just the better team, and I don't really see an angle where DRX can come out ahead.
If people don't know as well, by the way, because I'll give you a little bit of insight. I always like to like sort of pull the curtain back and break the fourth wall for a moment. If people don't know, if Monty has a whole vision in mind and he's setting up the whole thing like it was an extended Decimate, I'm not just going to jump in. That's only what an idiot on Reddit or Twitter would do. Jump in and go, actually, Monty, I don't want to derail the guy. He's setting me up. He's painting the whole picture. I'm just sitting back with a pina colada. Go, Monty. You're the fucking best at it, mate. Yeah, and then how would they do that? And then what do you think about this guy? And what's going next? Like, that's what he's the best at. And in that role, I become the host. And also, if I don't have really good angles, like obviously Monty makes a lot of his points that he'll tie to a specific game point of knowledge. I don't have that knowledge base, so I can't battle him there. I can maybe say, well, what about this stuff? Hasn't that guy sort of choked it? If you notice, I always use player performances the way I try to push and pull Monty a bit. I can't go head to head with him in some like chess match of League of Legends. So if you ever watch Summon Insight, you'll think on that show that EG's garbage is not going to win because I have to use the narrative build up in this way. That's why I have to let Jensen tell me his angle and then see if I can build off that. So I don't think that this is like some big DRX favour. So, Rich, what's your angle on this?
I mean, the saddest thing for me, just checking the bracket now, is that EDG will play Gen.G if things go as expected in the next round, where I was going to say I probably have those two as the best teams actually at Worlds for me. As I said, I'm not a massive JDG believer. I think T1 could potentially be fake news. And RNG, I mean, RNG, as I said, there were a lot of people's like dark horse before the tournament, but they've not given me recent reason to believe like that they're going to be right up there. I do think these are the two best teams in the league. And unfortunately, because Riot doesn't like double a limb or whatever, they might just meet in the round after this. But yeah, I don't see an angle for DRX to win, quite honestly. I'm not sure what it is. And again, in terms to your point, Thorin, in terms of like the minutiae of how these teams play from like a macro perspective, I wouldn't say, particularly with DRX, because as I sort of suggested, I didn't watch them even do their gauntlet run in LCK. So I don't really have the sample size to theorize an angle where they can win. And if we go default to the carries and be like, what about Deft? What about Zeka? It's like, well, bitch, I mean, Viper is better than Deft. Like, Deft's a legend. He's one of the GOATs of AD carry. Right here, right now, Viper's the best for me. And in mid lane, no, I don't have Zeka over Scout. And even if we class both those matchups as washes, I still think that you can argue that EDG wins everywhere else anyway. So yeah, I can't create a narrative or an angle where I'm like, but what if this happens? It would have to be in the same way that lots of people are like calling for Rogue to make some, some back-to-back cheesy drafts or something. I would argue you have to do the same with your DRX. You have to get around the fact that, as Thorin said already, that the mid laner doesn't have a massive champion pool and he's not like favored in that matchup necessarily anyway. You have to overcome that. You have to overcome the same situation that your secondary carry or primary carry, however you look at it in depth, is not going to most likely have his leg over in that matchup. So yeah, I think this is a cheese draft angle if I'm using my sort of plebeian analysis here. And I would argue that they need that more than Rogue need it in the JDG matchup. I think that is a closer matchup, Rogue versus JDG, than EDG versus DRX. As I said, I think the Rogue game could go, Rogue match could go 5 games. I do not see this going 5 games in almost any universe. So very difficult matchup for DRX, and I expect we will see EDG playing Gen.G in the next round, which will be a banger. But yeah, it would be sad that it's sad for me that it wouldn't be in the final.
I just want to tie that also to the point I made earlier about like the boring, like the mage mid laner and the fucking Enchanter support player. Similarly, right, the other thing, this is the mad thing about League of Legends. Why do people think those mages always are relevant for minimum 1 split, if not present, while the fucking other melees and stuff are there and the roaming shot? Why are they always there, guys? Because they are the most consistent way to play League of Legends. And not only that, when your player plays consistently on one of those in the mid lane, everyone else falls in line. They become streamlined, and you know how you're going to play, and if you're going to have push, if you're going to have a lead, what the jungler can do. It's brilliant. It's fucking perfect. That's why if you're someone like Scout, you'll always be underrated, mate. Because what everyone will do now, right, is if even the people who do watch the LPL, Jensen, they're going to go, yeah, but look, it's all well and good playing like an Azir or an Orianna, but when you play against like the fucking Silas, it's like, you mean Knight Silas, you mean Rookie on those champions. Yeah, those guys are going to spank you, because guess what? Those are like the GOAT players on super strong pop-off champions. He's playing against Zika now, mate. Like, I'll worry about when he gets to Chovy, and then Chovy's more on there. I'll have the Azir. Like, so I think that angle as well is a weird one to me. It's like people take these champions. I know they do it, like, funnily enough, within domestic regions, obviously based on their own experience of the champion in solo queue, which just kills me inside. Like what's mad is Emily Rand watches every fucking game of League of Legends in the universe. Why is she ever telling me what it's like in solo queue when she plays with a champion or sees a champion? Like, here's why I'll tell you, spoiler, someone from Riot has coached her that's like a way you relate to the fans, and like that'll make people understand what you're saying. She would never do that. She would tell me about how Rookie plays against this guy, and of course then he had a matchup though later on in the tournament against Yagao, and then he played with Kanavi. Like, that's what she'd normally hit me with. So I think people always underestimate, just like they do on those champions, because essentially what they think in League of Legends is the thing I've been battling uphill my whole career with on the Froggen angle, is they really think that Froggen was just scared to fucking play like Fizz and just flash in all the time. It's like, no, he was playing a different style of League of Legends, you morons. Like, that, it wasn't that he was easy who, and he's like, I'm just not Faker, I guess I'm just the nerd kid in class. Like, no, he just was the best at a different style of League of Legends. So to me, Scout's another one where he's just a really fun, and again, he'll never be the best player in the world, but when is he ever like the reason you lose the series? Like, he's just a fucking really solid player. And if someone like Zika, by the way, has any bad games, ever gets caught in draft, it's over. Scout will just put that bar here and you ain't going to clear it, mate. So, Jensen, do you have any final angle on this matchup for us?
Scout is definitely, he suffers from success, right? It's like he's not known for having a very limited specialized champion pool. He's not known for being particularly good at one champion or being limited to one playstyle. He just plays everything, and as a result of that, he doesn't have a very particular stylistic identity. But narrative-wise, that's not sexy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the reason why he suffers from success, because he's just too good at doing everything.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's the real joke, by the way, is like, that's why I can't handle that bloody the Koreans haven't embraced this guy. You should love him. He's like the ultimate fucking Korean mid laner. It's like exactly what you guys want. Yeah, go on, Rich.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, by the way, to your point, Thorin, I find it mind-blowing, and I've said this like year on year on year on year. There are two things that I don't understand, which aren't implemented more, especially from a Western perspective. The first one is when you're, and, you know, principally because we are typically outmatched, right? Like, typically our teams are not as good as the Eastern counterparts. There are two things which are super important, in my opinion, which the all-time great teams, or the potentially all-time great teams, have opted into, which is comfort and cheese. Like, the idea that you become meta slaves when you're playing against like the best teams in the world. Like, there's a reason, by the way, guys, why it's not just that, oh, Orianna and Ryze again. It's not just that they're getting buffs every world. Like, people will default towards this comfort style, this sort of default can work against any region style. It's like, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in this sense. And also, I just think that when you look at, for example, 2019 G2, even this year's Rogue, which is, you know, probably not 2019 G2, but they're one of obviously the better European teams, the combination of embracing comfort and the willingness to play things which aren't completely meta do yield success. And sure, that might just be catching someone off week one in a best of one, or it might be your ability to adapt later or deeper into a series. But whenever you're outmatched, as I said, the idea that you look at the pool of meta champions and you think these are the parameters in which we have to operate is mind-blowing to me. And it doesn't make any sense on a one-off tournament. If you want to say, in spring, I want to teach you guys the fundamentals of how to play League of Legends, so we're going to go for the meta, but okay, fair enough. But we're at Worlds. Like, there's not even a double elimination bracket, right? So it's one chance. And I think that Rogue, particularly with Lucian Nami, which is meant to be out of meta, and these style of champions that Trimby particularly likes to play, like no one was like thinking Lux is a champion to watch before this fucking world started, right? But he has that option. Even the Nasus, and this is a point we made really early on to what you said, Thorin, even though the Nasus was horrible, because he did it in not a meaningless BO1, but a BO1 when they were already through, that's still useful. That's still like, okay, fucking hell, this guy really does play anything. He might even whip out the Nasus if the opportunity presents itself again in a good matchup. Like, those things really matter. And I don't think that teams in general utilize those opportunities enough. And if I'm Zeka, for example, I would be playing things that are not my two favorite fucking champions against teams that I should definitely beat in BO1s just to make people think twice. Maybe you play the meta champion that everyone else can play, but you're not very good on, but you play it against some shit Western player and you look like a god. And then all of a sudden the whole dynamics of the bracket change. How are we going to draft against this team? Is he actually good at it? Or was it just the matchup against that particular player? So yeah, that's something that's just frustrated me until Kingdom Come, and I think it applies on every level. I think it applies in the local leagues, like in LEC and LCK, whatever, but especially on the Worlds level. So yeah, I find that very frustrating. But again, that's why as well I think that Rogue have a legitimate chance of going through, because I do believe that they have embraced that. And Rogue is a confidence-based team. Like, if you catch them on the right day, or the wrong day, if you're the other team, I guess, they can, I don't want to say like beat anybody, but like they can put up a good fight against the vast majority of teams in the world. So,
by the way, that's also why, on the other side from EDG, RNG being the like LCK-esque LPL team, that's why everyone says, damn, one is the fucking LPL LCK team, because the joke is they are willing to embrace like the fucking chaos and have fights all the time and just play like weird picks and try and make it unusual. Because the thing, and DRX is the best example of this, the thing that's whack about Korean teams is they don't think that way. Like, the joke is, Rich, when you're setting up like that, yeah, that's the way, like, first of all, in a movie narrative, or even just as a coach, you would try and think, right, where's my edge, or how do I make this go away? The Koreans really do have that like grind mindset of like, no, you just play the correct way, and if you're the best, you win. If not, you tip your hat. Well done, sir, you beat me. So the joke is, like, if the Koreans played basketball, I know they do, this is an analogy though, like if they were the guy who's like 6'5" and they're against the guy who's 7 foot, they would still try and back him down and do like a fucking shot over him, just get blocked all the time. Like, they would just be like, no, I have to like practice even more though, like my footwork. It's like, Nate, that's not the style for you. Like, and maybe in this case you want to run and be fast and go around him. Like, their logic is just like, this is the correct blueprint, so play this way, and if we are the best, then we win. The problem with that is that's not the way you approach a series. You don't go, well, if we are the best, we win, because mate, everyone would have a different fucking draft strategy then, different game plan. What you do is you ask, who is my team, and are we the best? I guess we're not, so actually I'm going to not throw that game plan out the window. Maybe there's even a world, this is the extreme, where what you do is you go, maybe I'm so much worse, I just want it to be that we're both really bad in this series, and then fuck it, like, then flip a coin, let's see if we've got a chance now. So yeah, that's the one angle, like DRX especially, I don't think will do, and in general Koreans, just, it doesn't seem like their approach. Like, the joke is, I also think that's how T1 plays, but in a different sense. They don't play the boring way, but they do play like, if we're all just the best players at our roles, we win doing this. It's like, I mean, I agree, but I have a problem with that word if. That if's fucking enormous right there. You're making it sound like it's just it's thrown in there. If we do that, it's like, but you aren't the best. So I generally have. Do you ever take on this, Jensen, like the sort of like gamesmanship element, like how teams see themselves?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's a trap that teams fall into as well, right? Because on one hand, you have that where a team is going to comfort and they find success, and on another hand, where a team is like 0-1 down, 0-2 down, and then the team says, you know what, screw it, nothing's working, let's go back to comfort, and then they just play the worst game of League of Legends that you've ever seen as well. So it's one thing to talk about cheesing and comfort, but my approach to these style things in general is about necessity breeds innovation, right? So the reason why I was looking at the Rogue series is that there's an angle, right? There is you can kind of like draw up the blueprint and say that these are the key breakpoints that we are going to have to hit. And then the way the cheese works is that you're not picking something that's going to surprise people, although yes, that sometimes works once in a while. You're picking something that fulfills a specific purpose, that trades off one element for another, that gives you an edge to cross those breakpoints in exchange for something else, right? And it's interesting that we talk about DRX because we have to bring up the fact that they have played Heimerdinger, I think, twice now, right? They played once against Rogue, and then I think they played a second time against the Gam Esports, right? The Vietnamese team, right? So it could be to say that this is where we're looking to cheese things because we're trying to cheese out to a bot lane matchup so that we're able to stabilize that. So you do something like the likes of a Senna Scion, right? Something that's hard to attack, something that's hard to dive. That's a bad example, right? But you get where I'm coming from, right? You set the criteria. This is what we're trying to achieve, and then you pick champions that are within the player's comfort area that are out of the meta that can kind of fulfill that, right? So similar with the Lucian Nami that the European teams are coming up with, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's like completely out of that field, right? What are we looking for here? We're looking to be able to have to attack the bot lane on these windows, right? And Lucian Nami, even though the E buff got nerfed with Electrocute, it still is able to achieve that. So that's the reason why they pick it, and that's the reason why it works. Now, as for DRX being able to cheese this series, however, I don't really see any form of blueprint where we can say that these are the big breakpoints that they need to hit to beat EDG. For them to cheese the draft against EDG, they have to fundamentally change the way the League of Legends is played for them to be able to win against EDG. Whereas for Rogue against JDG, if Rogue against JDG, if they are able to find a good pick in the bot lane, that's able to then enable first support move that can secure them Harrow and first Drake and put them in situations where then JDG is forced to check into their positions when they're approaching Drake 3. That's where I would see that draft advantage coming through for Rogue, right? So it's not necessarily always going back to like, we aren't better than these Asian teams. Let's just play comfort. Let's just play weird stuff. It's about figuring out what helps me cross the line against these teams and then picking the necessary champions to fulfill that and being willing to explore those possibilities.
I would also add to that, I think that you see a big difference between Rogue and G2, for example, not just in at Worlds, but also, you know, in the finals and so on, is you have, for example, in the bot lane, obviously the best combination of champions G2 can get is Seraphine Senna, right? But it's like one thing. Rogue have so much versatility in bot lane that I do think it's important that they win the first game. I think if they don't win the first game and they are shown to be weak, let's say, in particular matchups or whatever, things become difficult. But if you can hypothesize a game, for example, where they get Lucian Nami and they win that game, if the other team thinks we just need to ban out Lucian Nami or whatever, Rogue still have so many things they can do and options they can go to because they've shown so much. G2 had nothing. As soon as you banned Senna Seraphine, G2 was dead in the water, especially if you combine that with, for some reason, not putting caps on a champion that was able to sort of enable the team or carry the game or whatever, or put caps on fucking Seraphine or something, right? Like, they just had nowhere to go. So I do think that's also a big difference between the DRX series and the Rogue series. I'm not saying that DRX have like really small champion pools across the board, although I do think there are some issues there. It's just that from to your point, Jensen, there aren't different ways that they can play the game, right, in that sense. Whereas Trimby can play anything. He can play hard engage. In fact, typically until he was basically forced off hard engage during the season, he was always playing hard engage. It was his Rakan that people were scared of. He was a good Alistair player. It's only recently that we're like, holy shit, this guy's a god on enchanters. So they have so much more flexibility in terms of how they can fundamentally change playstyle and still be comfortable in their series versus DRX in their series, where I completely agree. It's just very difficult for me to see an angle where it's like, unless both teams show up and DRX shows up really well and EDG just has a bad day, like that's kind of what I'm hoping for at this point, right? Because as you say, like, I can't see an angle where it's like, okay, we're going to flip the script on them and we're going to suddenly play this. They haven't shown me. And again, culturally, maybe that it's just not something that they've even prepped for, where it's like, here's our plan B and plan C, and we feel very comfortable in these completely unique draft plans. I don't see it happening. I think they probably have a very specific Korean draft tree, which is heavily based on the current champion pools that we've already seen up to this point and meta. would be my guess.
This video was kindly supported by Ahmed Hadjou, Hades GOUD, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Adam Ochs, Animosity, Bot Pounder 420, Jensen Goh, Kovacevicd, Ord, Pacy, Tobias Bernasconi, Tosh, Torin, and as always, a special thanks goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Would you like to ask a question in one of those monthly AMAs where sometimes I roast people? Do you want teasers to find out who the guests are for upcoming shows and interviews I'm doing? Maybe you want to be part of one of those cool, lengthy esports discussions that I have. Well, if any of those perks sound tantalizing to you, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today, where? Via the Patreon link in the description box below.